Good evening. The intent and purpose of this show is not to embarrass or to discriminate the government in any way, shape, or form. We're here to discuss issues that negatively impact us as Jamaican and try to find solution. So tonight we will discuss with our guests and our panelists the issues and pursue solution, as I said before. But I'm gonna ask you guys just to like, share, and subscribe. Many of you guys sometimes don't like. There are certain things that you don't like about the show, but what I'm asking you guys to do, not to put a dislike, because sometimes it slow down the flow of the show. So you want to reconsider sometimes before disliking it. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Here we have it. Dr. Paul Ivy and Attorney David Brown. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mr. Sutherland.
Great,
Thanks for having
great.
me.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure. And Mr. Brown, it's my pleasure have you tonight. So we're gonna get straight into it, because what we want to talk about tonight, guys, is hope I did not offend any of you guys by saying guys, speaking to the big attorney, speaking to the big doctor. I hope I didn't offend you.
No man, press along. Not a problem.
All right. So we want to discuss the crime situation. As you all know, the month of January, we actually have 65 persons that violently lost their life in Jamaica. I heard it was down from previous years, but it's still not acceptable. So with that being said, we're gonna just dig into it, try to address some of the issues and see if we could find a solution. But before we go, so I am gonna ask Dr. David Brown for an open statement.
Well, I see that you're trying to elevate me to Dr. Ivy's status. No, I'm not doctor.
I said attorney David Brown. I think that's what I said. I'm gonna get a little confused with the doctor and the attorney. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Attorney Brown.
No, I'm glad for the promotion. Okay. Let me say firstly, it's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Ivy. I've watched you on a couple videos, and I'm impressed with your story, your humility, and your shining example of what Jamaican academics represent on a global scale. And I'm here pretty much to learn. I will give my 2 cent words, but I'm looking forward to learn from you, sir. So having said that, I have sort of scripted my opening remarks per the instruction and guidance of the moderator, Mr. Sutherland. So let me begin. Good evening, Mr. Sutherland. Good evening, Dr. Ivy, and good evening, everyone. Please allow a latitude of approximately 9 or 10 minutes to receive my opening comments. Whatever is God's will, my pledge to help Jamaica, under God, to increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity is consistent with the following themes. 1, re-empower the police. And 2, don't give up on Jamaica. I begin by quoting a note from former JCF Flying Squad detective and Miami-Dade Police Department officer Malachi Smith, who wrote as follows, quote, "If we as a people, a family, a country can't question our leaders on both sides of the aisle, our judiciary, our civil servants, our clergy, our academics, etc., we're not going away," unquote. Malachi further wrote, quote, "I beg you, family, stop calling each other criminals. These shouldn't be the days of Socrates when we are prepared to give our family members a cup of poison to silence them. We are better than this. I know we are." let's liberate ourselves from political, ideological, and self-righteous constructs and move with alacrity to build a great society and Jamaica land we love, unquote. Another relevant view states that there is nothing wrong with Jamaica that cannot and will not be fixed by Jamaicans and friends of Jamaica with God's help. Regarding the first theme, that is, re-empower the police, I humbly submit that the facts and statistics are relevant to this perspective held by various former police officers. When Colonel Trevor McMillan became police commissioner in 1993, his tenure demotivated the JCF and empowered the public to disregard the legitimacy of the JCF. Gradually, Jamaica's criminal elements seized this shift in national security paradigm to develop an alarming lawlessness that has resulted in the continued high annual number of murders in Jamaica. The JCF was not ready for Mr. McMillan, an outsider, to be its leader. And to this day, there is a view that the JCF has not recovered from the negative impact of his leadership. Moreover, the JCF has still not enjoyed a proper relationship with the JDF, working for a good cause. That is, cohesively and harmoniously protecting the people of Jamaica. An enjoyable and effective working relationship between the JCF and the JDF is possible because I experienced an effective working relationship with the JDF and the solemnity of such a relationship. Police Commissioner McMillan was certainly justly appointed to address the JCF's physical abuse of the populace. There was a need to protect the civil rights of the Jamaican people. He must be commended for instilling discipline and weeding out corrupt cops. Yet, there is a perspective that his emphasis was on policing the police and not preserving the integrity of fighting crime. Mr. McMillan was never considered an inspiration for various members of the JCF in the fight against crime. In fact, a remnant of committed crime fighters during Mr. McMillan's tenure diligently fought crime with police officers such as Mr. Garnet Daly, Tony Hewitt, Keith Garner, Bingy White, Donald Pusey, Stitch Martin, Renato Adams, and many others, being a restraint to lawlessness. Mr. Adams, despite his detractors, was genuinely committed to the safety of the people, and many Jamaicans appreciated and have not forgotten his service as an effective crime fighter. This observation in no way endorses any style of policing which allegedly uses extrajudicial killing, because such conduct is contrary to the rule of law. Many JCF members will agree that Mr. McMillan's leadership not only dramatically increased the public's negative perceptions of the JCF, but also demoralized the JCF. Mr. McMillan's leadership of the JCF is deemed to have created an environment in which the public was quick to believe negative news about police conduct without having the requisite knowledge of an event. The need to reform and improve the JCF during Mr. McMillan's tenure was clear, but the Reformation should have been internally addressed in a different way, even if Mr. Macmillan was chosen to be the police commissioner. Critics say that Mr. Macmillan's zeal and lack of understanding of policing, especially within the Jamaican context, destroyed the JCF's psyche to effectively fight crime, and it is the primary cause of Jamaica's consistently high annual number of murders. In tandem, the creation of Indicom, which was and is entirely necessary and is consistent with the best policies of developed countries, emerged within a Macmillan milieu, wherein Jamaica's criminal elements were already empowered, consistent with various police officers' perspectives. Unfortunately, the JCF perceived Indicom as an ancillary shield for the benefit of criminal gangs to extort and terrorize the Jamaican people. The JCF's response, however, was already influenced by the unintended outcome of the Macmillan effect. Jamaica needs to re-empower the police. The Macmillan effect in no way suggests that a member of the JDF should not be the police commissioner. The Macmillan effect is simply the perception held by various cops of Mr. Macmillan's anti-police leadership style and erroneous national security priority. The rule of law necessary for Jamaica's peace and prosperity must reset Jamaica. In tandem with 1 Samuel 6 and 7, verses 1 to 2, the Ark of the Covenant, none other than the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of the Eternal Father, must provide the blessed radiance through which the Lord will protect Jamaica, or the JCF will keep watch in vain. The JCF is indeed a force for good. Criminals, however, are still empowered by the Macmillan effect and have scant respect for the JCF. I conclude these comments with this reality and a subsequent and timely word from Paul. Jamaica has produced Usain Bolt, the greatest sprinter of all times, and can produce the best law enforcement agency in the world. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Philippians 4, verse 8. Thank you.
Oh, wow. 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 Thank you very much. That was indeed deep. And I like what you're saying there. And the reason why I like it is that I can remember clearly in 1993 when the change happened. So that's profound. Dr. Paul Ivy, do you want to have an open statement, sir?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Sutherland, for the opportunity to be on this platform and to be along with Attorney David Brown. I thank him for his kind remarks that he made about me in his opening. I just want to indicate that the views that I'm going to express here are my views. They do not reflect the views of my employers or any other persons. I'm not a criminologist, I'm an academic. I've been an academic now going 3 decades. For the last 30 years, that's the only industry I've worked in. And as an academic and an engaged citizen, my motivation is based on, in a democracy, a citizen who holds the office of citizen has a responsibility to be involved in the affairs of their state. That's part of my motivation. I was born after independence, and looking on as to what Jamaica has achieved in the 61 years that we have had independence, I have some concerns as it relates to the potential that we had as a country and how it is that we have not met up with that potential. We have underperformed, if you will. And one of the biggest indicators is our runaway crime situation that we have had. I harken back to Norman Manley on the morning of August 7, 1962. He made these remarks. We have come to independence prepared and ready to shoulder our new responsibilities and united, I believe, in one single hope that we may make our small country a safe and happy home for all our people. I take that to be the promise of independence, and our independence project was now to orchestrate that safe and happy and prosperous home for all Jamaicans. We have not done so. And I want to make the point that what we have seen here is that the purpose of government, I want to underscore this matter of the crime situation, and I want to locate it within the context of what governments are established to do. The essential primary purpose of governments, in terms of governments being instituted among men, is to bring about law and order. The crime situation in Jamaica, from my perspective, is a failure of government. The failure of government. Governments have at their disposal the various levers that they can use to bring about order in a society. And the evidence that we have seen indicates, in my mind, an absence of effective governmental action. As it relates to the crime situation, I think some of the dimensions that we must bear in mind, we must take account of history. I'm a student of history because I really believe that history gives us such a good window into contextualizing contemporary activities. So, for example, just to touch the police force, we need to appreciate that the Jamaica Constabulary Force and its historical antecedents is that it was born right after the Morant Bay Rebellion in 1865. It was patterned of the police force in Northern Ireland or someplace in Ireland, I do believe. And the purpose of the police force formed as it was there in 1865 or just thereabouts was to protect the plantocracy. It wasn't a force for good, as it were, except that good for the protection of the plantocracy against the unruly Negroes. So there's that. So when we look at the arc of history and how the formerly enslaved Africans in Jamaica, after emancipation in 1834, they were thrown off the plantations. No property, no compensation, nothing, just left to go fend for themselves, so to speak. And the plantocracy schemed in all kinds of devious ways to keep them marginalized. Our crime situation cannot be divorced from the social architecture of the Jamaican society. It cannot be divorced from that. And we need to pay attention to that. And as the discourse unfolds, I'll delve into that a bit more. One of the things that we need to appreciate as well is that rights-based citizenship in a democracy is fundamental. The Constitution guarantees a citizen certain rights. And I am not for abridging those rights, except for provided by law and as prescribed by the Constitution. We have the Emergency Powers Act, and it specifies when you can have a state of emergency and when you can curtail rights. We have seen over the years all of these special squads, you name them, acid, eradication squad, this year's squad, this year's squad. There was a time when bad boy police reigned, and they were celebrated in songs, in the dance hall, and so on and so forth. That is not the kind of society that we really want. We have had the Suppressions of Crime Act. I think it was enacted in 1974, and it remained in place until the 1990s. And having the Suppression of Crime Act in place, a whole generation of law enforcement officers were oriented and formatted under the Suppression of Crime Act being in place. And so until it was repealed, and what did we see? All of those squads, including the Suppression of Crime Act, it did not curtail the crime. Did not curtail the crime, you know. When I was a little boy growing up, and police used to drive Land Rover Jeep, they would drive up in a community or in a corner, go up in a Jeep boy, go up in a Jeep boy. That's how citizens were being treated and so forth. So we have those kinds of scenarios that we need to look at. And my point of departure is going to be that two main planks of my argument. One, government has a responsibility to maintain law and order. Two, it's going to be 3 points actually. There must be a respect for citizens' rights. And thirdly, we must look at the social determinants of crime. Those are my opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, and that makes a lot of sense to me. It's just give another layer to the issues at hand. But the record has peaked, though, that there has been a spike. When you look at the records, there has been spikes in crime. Can't you dissect those records and see when the changes start and what would have impacted? Or you just want to take a general position as you described?
Well, in terms of looking at the different time periods on the spikes and so forth, I recall being in a presentation done by former Commissioner of Police, Owen Ellington. And he did a kind of historical survey of the different periods in which the crime spiked, if you will, to use that particular construct. But I'm generalizing, because in all of those periods, when you had this spike in crime, there was government in place. Government was in office, and it occurred under the different administrations. So it again comes back to my point. It's a failure of government. It's a failure of government. What my view on this is this: each time there is an election and a new administration is sworn in office, I say to myself, is this going to be the administration that is going to bring law and order from Morant Bay to Negril Point? What do I mean? Order in public spaces. Go with me from Morant Bay to Negril, and let us go to all major towns and see the chaos that reigns in all of these towns. Your stations are taken over with taxis to be taxi stands and all those type of things. Transportation depots are beds of this extortion. Loader men and all kind of men and whatever just overrun the place. Where you live, Mr. Sutherland, it's not utopia, but there is order. There is order. When I'm in the States and I'm driving in a 45-mile zone, I don't let that needle go up to 50. because I know that a set of lights are going to come behind me in short order. If we do not maintain the little things, take care of the little things in Jamaica, we will not be able to take care of the big things. All our major town centers are chaotic and overrun with disorder, and no country can maintain civility with that kind of situation. That's where we need to start. I recall the Prime Minister saying that he had given Commissioner Anderson a mandate or instructions or directive, if you will. That's what they call these things, a directive, to restore order to halfway tree. That has not occurred. So the incubator that we have, the incubator of lawlessness, anything goes. A man wants to set up a stall to jerk chicken and just put it anywhere he feel like. What kind of country can we have in that kind of situation? Crime fighting is about psychology, psychology. We have a situation, for example, where motorcyclists are required to wear helmets. And left, right, and the center, you see them riding past the police up and down without helmets, and nothing happens. That kind of anything goes is the kind of environment that is conducive to runaway crime and lawlessness. It is a failure of governance.
So yes, it is indeed. So you're saying the lawlessness is because the government, whatever, we're not going in any after the two parties, because people try to point fingers in that direction. And this platform, I try not to do that. So you're
Right.
saying that the type of lawlessness, it is fostered because of the government failure to enforce the law of the land.
Yes, government, local government, and the central government. Local government, we're having the local government elections coming up soon. They are the worst. They are the worst as it relates to performance. So, and then at the central government level, we have the same kind of thing.
Mm. So and I thought about that at one point too, because it's all about, I had this conversation, it's all about getting numbers, trying to win an election. So they would bring that level of comfort to the people, live their life, allow them to do whatever they want to do as long as they're getting the numbers that they want.
And in that regard, we come now to the squatter communities. Close to 1 million Jamaicans live in what are called squatter communities. And when occasions come for them to be removed, in fact, they are encouraged sometimes by the politicians to go onto these particular properties and so forth. And they are counting up the votes, as you have said. And when time comes for them to be removed, they say, no, they have to be regularized. They have to be regularized. But the larger point I'm making in that regard, there's an historical aspect to it. But close to 1 million Jamaicans are living in squatter communities. They have no proper facilities because they were not planned and so on and so forth. Zinc fence and all kinds of materials, plywood, cardboard, and all those type of things that make the houses. What kind of conditions like those can children be reared properly? You can't rear children properly under those conditions. So what we have is essentially a factory. We have a factory. We have widespread dysfunctionality in the society. And these dysfunctionalities are the perfect ingredients for crime and disorder.
Yeah, but the days of the badman police and all that you talk about, and the unique tragedy that the police would have created, it's because of what they have to deal with, those unique situations. And so that's probably why the days in my time in Jamaica where there was a name brand police. I think those days were, we were fearful of police, and we would be mindful of what we do. Like you mentioned earlier, in the States, you don't go over 50 because there was a light there. And in my community that I raised up with, there's just certain things you don't do because you fear of that bad man police hearing your name.
Well, yes, but that's not the way to order a society.
Um,
You don't order a society on the basis of fear. That's a kind of dictatorship. That's why I talk about rights-based citizenship, Because if I'm driving, as I use the example, and the satellites come behind me, it's we have seen incidents where things have gone awry, but as a general proposition, it's not that it's going to create an adverse situation. The essential point in that is that people are not able to break the laws with impunity. That's the point. That is the essential point. Breaking laws with impunity. We see it all over Jamaica.
let me ask you a question, Mr. Ivy, and I'm going to get back to you shortly, Mr. Brown. But if you were a part of government, what would have been your suggestion to make a difference to the crime situation?
It is easy. And I'm not sitting here as an armchair person to say it is easy. It is easy from the standpoint of the theoretical considerations. Enforce the laws that are on the books. I mean, how much more complicated can you get? You have a set of laws that say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and just enforce them. That's all you have to do. Enforce the laws. You don't give preferential. All right, look at election campaigns, for example. Look at the lawlessness that accompanies election campaigns. People are all over motor vehicles, body protruding, man hanging out of a window, man hanging over there, and so on and so forth. The political process itself is encouraging lawlessness. So I'm just making it very simple, I'm not getting complicated. I'm simply saying we have a set of laws, enforce the laws that are on the books. When I drive through Port Maria, for example, it takes me half an hour to get from the bridge to out by the other end to going east. Why? Port Maria is a market. The entire town is a market. How is that acceptable? These are the kind of things I'm talking about. Just go to basics. The basics, the fundamentals. There's a particular law called the Town and County Act or something like that. It says, for example, that you can't light a fire after 6 o'clock. Nobody enforces that or what have you and so forth. All of these type of things. I am advocating for an orderly society in which the laws that are on the books are consistently enforced. That's my thesis.
All right. I must say though, I try to be neutral, but I honestly share your sentiment in that regard. Attorney Brown.
Yes, sir.
Do you share the sentiments of which Dr. Paul Ivy is this person here?
Well, any rational thinking and responsible Jamaican will realize that everything that Dr. Ivy is saying is relevant and cogent. Jamaica has an abundance of problems, and although I'm focusing on the criminal aspect of it, the crime fighting, everything is interconnected. From a political science perspective, while I understand and can respond point to point to Dr. Ivy saying, I'm kind of limited in this forum. But I'm a Jamaican, sometimes we over here, we're regarded as foreigners by our fellow Jamaicans on the island, right? But we are Jamaicans, heart and soul. We're all Jamaicans, and we love Jamaica. That's one thing I noticed with Jamaicans. They love Jamaica, right? So it's quite unfortunate that being 61 years, so to speak, right, since independence, and I want to be careful here. I'm not speaking in any negative. Pardon me?
No, you were just breaking up. You're I guess you're having a little network issue. You're breaking up, but
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you now, sir.
Yes, I was saying I want to be careful because I don't wish to be seen as speaking negatively of any government, right? But the reality is that the level of maturity that is required to have the type of orderly society that Dr. Ivy is speaking about requires intent and commitment and cohesivity. The United States of America is much older than Jamaica, but where we are now as a country, we didn't reach there overnight. We had a lot of growing pains. I mean, speaking of America, a lot of growing pains, a lot of lawlessness, a lot of criminality, right? You
Mhm.
know, the
Mhm.
mafia, you know, all this kind of stuff I can name. Tinker Stewart said, you know, every nation has their own frustration and moderation, right? At the end of the day, nowhere is better than yard. How do we fix Jamaica? How do we put Dr. Ivy's observations, right, in proper context and come together? That's the real responsibility of the people in God knows and the head of
Yes.
state, whether
Right.
it's Mr. Holness or his preceding counterparts. And it is not that easy. It's easy theoretically, but it's not that easy because of a number of factors, right? We have to remember the structure that Dr. Ivy alluded to, the social architecture, is correct in terms of our history. You know what happened from colonization and how our ancestors were treated. You know, the force was really a force to protect the plantocracy, right? It wasn't a force for good for the populace because there was a racist construct, you know, in the Western world in terms of Africans, blacks, right? So we know the history. We know the social cries that come out from the spirits of Jamaicans. But where we are in 2024, we have to take responsibility for our destiny. We have to take responsibility for our island, right? And after all these years, 61 years, we have to get it right. So I'm not into talking about JLP or PNP. I'm agreeing
No.
with Dr. Ivy with the need for governance from a local government level and from a central government level. And some of these problems he's talking about, it's obviously a lack of proper governance at the local government level, right? So there's nothing he said that I disagree with. One point I want to make though, in terms of something he probably said that that's not the kind of society we want. Okay, families, the families of the earth, right? We are different. We have certain specificities that are unique to us. That's how God made us. And Jamaica, let's speak about Jamaica. The organic culture that we have doesn't always conform to the immediacy of our expectation, right?
Right.
And we have to look at the history, the compilation of the people who comprise the citizens of Jamaica, right? We say out of many, one people. We know that we are primarily people of African descent, but Jamaica has a rich heritage of diversity, even if the numbers don't reflect that, right? And it has influenced our culture. And one prime minister some years ago made reference to our development since post-independence development into having two Jamaicas. Jamaica is really a class system. So the
Mhm.
construct that you might have looking at it from one perspective doesn't apply to the other aspect of Jamaica, right? And we're having the crime, the problem of crime, at least the commission of these violent crimes that we're talking about. It's mainly from the other Jamaica, you know, the lesser class Jamaica, right? The other class might be, you know, perpetrators of crime behind the scenes and so on and so forth. But the people who are suffering at large, it's really the poor Jamaicans, black folks. So when we had the Badman Cup, that doesn't seem to be, you know, that attractive to Dr. Ivy. I don't believe these police officers set out to become badman cop, right? It's the culture in which we live. We are visual people, but Africans are also a word people, word oriented, right? So the tendency to reflect the culture or someone's perception of the culture in the art, in music, and in word When they celebrate these things in song, it might not be ideal. It's just a channel that these Jamaicans are using to express their artistry and their innate God-given abilities. So it goes back to what Dr. Ivy is saying, the responsibility to take all these differentiations in our society to get a cohesive society, progressive, based upon the rule of law, is the responsibility of any government in office, the government of the day. So I wholeheartedly salute Dr. Ivy's observation, right? I have some comments confined towards crime, but that's my response to comments on Dr. Ivy's opening.
Dr. Ivy, those days though, I thought, and maybe I was ignorant, that the name brand police, as I call them, well, there was a law, there was a law enforcers.
Yes, well, yes, they were. But you see, as Mr. Brown has indicated, we have the two Jamaicas. They policed a particular way in some communities, which they dared not police in other communities. So they were policing in that particular aggressive style against people who look like themselves. And
Oh,
they
okay.
also sprung from that same socio-economic class as well. So what we find, and I'm arguing this from a sociological perspective as well, that the JCF has changed for the better significantly over time, but it has not yet been purged of its historical antecedents, where it is having that overhang, that afterlife of from whence it came. But I want to go a little bit further because, and also to go back to some caveats. When I mention government, I'm not talking about any particular party forming the government. I'm talking about government writ large, government in office, government who has been elected and are in office at any given point in time, regardless of what parties that form the government at any given point in time. Having said that, so when you talk about the transformation of a country, I've made this point before with my friends on social media, and I've always had to explain myself that I'm just using it as an example to say that transformation of a country is possible. I'm not into an endorsement of the methods, but just that you could take a country from point A and based on leadership, you can take it to point B. Talking about Singapore. Michael Manley and Lee Kuan Yew were students together at the London School of Economics. They graduated. Michael Manley came back, went into trade unionism, and eventually became prime minister and all of that. Lee Kuan Yew went back to Singapore, and the rest is history. Singapore is now a developed country. You can leave your cell phone, you can leave your computer in a bar, or in a pub, or in a restaurant, and you go and come back and see it there. A society can be transformed with transformational leadership. Leadership is critical, and I'm going to talk about the other side of the equation in a minute. Right here in our backyard, in the Caribbean, that is, I'm in Jamaica, so my reference is to that. In Barbados, several years ago, there was a prime minister by the name of Erskine Sandiford. Erskine Sandiford made some tough, critical decisions as it relates to the economy and so on and so forth. And because of Erskine Sandiford's tough decisions, the Barbadian dollar, the exchange to the US dollar, remains stable at 2 to 1, even up till now. It's hovering about 2 to 1. You see where our dollar has gone. But the larger point I'm making is this. Because of the decisions that he made at the time, he lost the election. But the decisions that he took benefited the country over time for the longer period. We do not have in Jamaica, I think, the equivalence of an Erskine Sandiford, who is going to take decisions for the long term and not necessarily looking at the election cycle. These are the kinds of things that we're missing. These are the kinds of things that we're lacking in Jamaica. Politicians who are statesmen, they are looking intergenerationally. What are the kinds of decisions that they will make that will redound to the benefit of future generations and future generations not yet born? Those kinds of things. That's what we need. The other side of the equation is that citizens have a responsibility to hold their government accountable. So when we are not getting the kind of orderly society, functional society, a society that works for the majority of the citizens of our, we cannot have what we have now, where this political apathy, where 30% of the electorate is going out to vote and those kinds of things. The former, he was a cultural activist, and then laterally, before he passed, Tony Leng had this saying that Jamaica is like a company and the citizens are the shareholders. But we left it up. We left it up as the shareholders, and that is why the country is in the state that it is in. Because more citizens are not playing their roles as citizens who are central to a democracy. Active citizenship is central to a democracy. And what we have, unfortunately, is that we have the whole divide and rule strategy has been perpetrated against Jamaica. Are you Jamaicans? Are you green or are you orange? And we are split down the middle, and we defend to the nth degree our tribe. And our tribe can do nothing wrong, regardless of how egregious it is. We defend our tribe. That is part of the problem we're having. So when you go back even to the roots of crime, remember now, crime started, the whole incubation of the crime situation in Jamaica is kind of organically linked to the politics. It started out with stone throwing in the 1940s, the trade unionism, the rivalry between the trade unions in the 1940s, and they throw stones and whatever. Remember that the two major parties were born out of the respective trade unions. BITU, NWU, PNP, JLP. They formed out of that. And then they migrated from throwing of stones to guns and all of that and so on, and the formation of the garrisons and all of those type of things. And there have been studies about the garrisons and the need to dismantle the garrisons. But nothing has been done substantially to dismantle the garrisons and so forth, to the extent now that the criminals have migrated out of being under political control, so to speak, even though it's not exclusively so, but largely so. And they are on their own now as crime entrepreneurs. They're crime entrepreneurs. And what is needed is to bring them to books. But we have these connections, which takes me now to the matter of corruption. Corruption is part of the ingredients that's driving the crime situation. How can a person, so when we talk about arrest people, convict them, send them to prison, and man stay in prison and running him gang same way? How him get a cell phone? How him get SIM cards? How him get credit in phone in prison to be running his gang even though he's behind bars? So when we come to the different factors that are driving the crime situation, we see that they are legions. It's like when the part in the Bible when they talk about somebody who was possessed with something, and they say, well, they are legions in terms of the demons that are there. Our crime situation is multifaceted. And so it's a multi-pronged approach that's going to be needed to solve the crime problem. You talk about inequality, and the two Jamaicas, we still have, there have been changes, but at its core, the social architecture largely remains the same. It is color coded. Who is at the bottom? Look at the color. Who is in the middle? You can see a mixture. Who is at the top? You can still see the color gradation in the Jamaican population and in terms of the social stratification. The Jamaican society is remarkably unequal, you know, and inequality has been shown by research to be a driver of crime. When inequality is measured by the Gini coefficient, and Jamaica's Gini coefficient is in the middle of the range. It ranges from 0 to 100. And we are in the middle, about 40%, 50%, thereabouts of the level of inequality in the society. Those things are fertilizer for crime. So if we do not go into the society and diffuse or neutralize the social determinants of crime, we're going to still have this problem. As a matter of fact, the current Minister of National Security, and I speak specifically the current Minister of National Security, he seems to have been coming around now to be appreciating the role of social intervention as part of the crime fighting strategy. Apparently, at first, he didn't seem to be so sanguine about social intervention. He had an article in Sunday's paper, last Sunday's Gleaner, about social intervention as one of the planks in the crime fighting strategy. But before, we were using the brute force as the only weapon in the arsenal to fight crime. And that's why those special squads didn't work. And that's why the Suppression of Crime Act didn't work. And that's why all these states of emergency that were instituted, that's why they really didn't work. You can go in and you can put out the fire. But then the ingredients that are driving the crime is still there. I haven't even touched the education system as yet, because the education system is putting out hundreds of illiterates who are fodder for the gangs because they can't be employed in a 9 to 5. They have no skills. What they're gonna do?
Wow.
Let me pick up on something that Dr. Ivy said as it relates to dealing with crime. It is true that there are myriad of problems that Jamaica has, and it has to be a multifaceted approach. I can speak of the JCF, right? Because I understand the JCF. I might not have been in there for 30 years, but I've been in there sufficiently long, and I've carried out duties, variety of duties. I understand the artery of the JCF. And I want to confine my discussion to policing, because what Jamaica needs to do is to take politics out of policing. If politics is not out of policing, we cannot become the number one or top rate law enforcement that I alluded to, right? Politics destroys Jamaica's policing, right? Along the same lines you're talking about. I believe there has been improvement, right? But it's a deep-rooted structure, which I'm still aware exists because I'm in communication with people, right? I've never abandoned the JCF. So let me say this. We get the type of police officers that are product of our societies, right? Yes. So we can expect to have a certain result if you're not investing sufficiently to get the desired outcome. The governments, both parties of Jamaica, has never really continuously invested in policing the way it ought to do to bring Jamaica to the level of a developed country. Yes, I understand we're lacking resources, right? But then, you know, there's a level of creativity and emphasis and all those things that can make a difference, right? And while my thesis, my first point is about re-empowering the police, and I drew on the criticism or the perspectives that many law enforcement officers have regarding the appointment of Mr. Macmillan and that change. You spoke about the way how police the one class of Jamaica and the other class. When I
Yes.
was a young police and I'm out there and I'm saying, sir, ma'am, I was laughed to scorn.
Oh.
Because, oh, DJ, you're going to kiss a speaky spooky. You know, talking to the general public, right? Because the norm is to say, a young man like me can look at a man like you. He said, boy, come out of the car.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that was the culture, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I understood that there was a need to really refine and improve the police and so forth.
You're
I
still
know
doing
it's much
it.
better
You're
now,
still
right?
doing it. You're
I
still
think
doing
it's
it.
much better now. But back with the Macmillan thesis, why I tend to agree with my former colleagues, not bashing Mr. Macmillan. You had to understand the psychology of policing. You had to understand the psychology of your culture. And Mr. Macmillan wasn't from the other Jamaica. You see what I'm saying? So he couldn't even connect with the men and women who is leading. You gotta have someone who understand poor people picking, understand where the masses of recruits came from in Jamaica. It might change now. They might have a lot of degrees and more refined. But the culture
Yes.
of policing, right? At least during that time when that shift occurred, right? It was vastly people who were not as I don't want to offend them, my squatters and all that, right? But they couldn't grab certain things, maybe like officers today are grasping it, right? So
Yes.
you needed a surgical approach by a commissioner, and that was lost. That gap was there, and it has significantly affected policing. I'm gonna give you some numbers, right? Which caused me to really state what I state. And for disclosure, this has been said a long time about Mr. Macmillan, but I never echoed it. The reason is one of my batchmates, my squad at least, and a dear friend of mine, she was actually Mr. Macmillan's secretary. So whenever that conversation came up with anybody, I avoided it because I felt that loyalty to my squad. And she had so much respect for Mr. Macmillan. She adored him. And this is not about Mr. Macmillan as an individual, no, because he's a statesman, he's a great person, but just the policing thing I'm talking about. In independence, we had like 63 murders in 1962, annual murders, right?
62.
Yeah, thereabouts, right? And coming down, we were in double digits, like 70s, 65, then 66, we got like, 100 something, 100, that's in the hundreds. Then when we reached like 1973, we got to 200 and something. 74, 100, 75, 195, 1976, 367. And I say, if 2024 ends and the annual murder in Jamaica is 367, I don't think the State Department would give any, US State Department that is, would give any advisory about crime in Jamaica. That would be a significant reduction, right? So we went on now to 1977, 409, thereabouts. 1978, 381, thereabouts. 79, 351. If we end 2024 with 351, that's still 351 too much. But you understand the point I'm making compared to 1200, 1300, 1400, 1500, 1600. And lo and behold, in 1980, we jumped from 351 to 889, thereabouts. What happened?
That was a political war.
Yes, that was a civil war. That was a civil war.
Okay. So when that happened, are we to think then that there was still poverty in Jamaica, garrisons in Jamaica, a lot of these social ills that we're still dealing with as a young country, coming out of post-slavery, post-emancipation, still dealing with these things? I think we were. And what type of force we had, which was still pretty much, a force that didn't police uptown the same way the police downtown, right? So there are still issues. It might be on a larger scale now, but we still had some of those endemic issues that we have now. But listen, I am not advocating politics here, but I'm going to tell you this. For 9 years, consistently, the number of murders in Jamaica from 1981 to 1989 were in the 400s. That's 9 years.
Went
Why?
back down.
Yeah, no, it went back down from the 800
From
in
80,
1950.
yeah,
But for
okay.
9 years, it was in 400. It never reached 500. So what was the police force doing at that time to police Jamaica that it's not doing now? You see what I'm
But
saying?
remember now, it is not just the police force which is the lead
Mhm.
on crime.
Right.
So we need to ask ourselves, what were the other factors that were at play in
Around them time.
addition to the enforcement, law enforcement?
Right.
But law enforcement is just one dimension of crime control. You also have a situation of discipline, self-discipline, where a citizen obeys the law of the land. You just and what we had now was a breakdown in families. Dr. Herbert Gale has indicated that ground zero of our crime tsunami is crisis families. Crisis families, fatherlessness in the families, families in which children are raising themselves. Mr. A particular public commentator made mention of a 12-year-old boy in Westmoreland who was in charge of himself, was basically in charge of himself. We see them at the street lights wiping car windows and so on and so forth. This breakdown in family life is another dimension of the dysfunctionality in the society. So if we focus singularly on law enforcement without taking cognizance of the other variables that are at play, that have been allowed or have deteriorated in the same time period as well, or the different time periods that we're talking about. There we go when we see the other factors
Can,
coming
can
into
you
play.
can you
The
point to
economy, for
anything?
example, I'll give
Okay.
you just a quick last point on this. The
Okay.
economy has not performed for the last 50 years. Jamaica has been averaging 1% growth. So when you have 1% growth in the formal economy, informal activities are going to fill the void.
Why last week I had this guy on the show, Sir Lawrence. He said he was making comparison, and he said 80, which is a much poorer country
Yes.
than Jamaica. Their crime rate is lower. Is that a fact?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is in
So
terms
what
of
would have
the per capita.
so what would have contributed to that, considering economically they are in a worse shape than us? Uh, what would have contributed to that?
The-
If you
Okay.
want to make the comparison, I don't know if it's a fair comparison. I'm just wondering.
What would have contributed to that in
Yeah,
terms of, well,
the
because it's not just poverty, but what we're talking about is the different variables coming together in a cocktail. So
okay.
when one made mention of the economy has not performed, the education system has not performed, family structure has deteriorated. So what we're having is a cocktail. You see, the point I'm making is not any single variable. And then you have a million Jamaicans in squatter communities and so forth. And then you have lawlessness in every town. So it's a cocktail of dysfunctionality, Mr. Sutherland.
I hear you, but what what other layer that you can peel off? I see Attorney Brown going towards law enforcement as being one of the major issue. But what else can you point your finger to, Dr. Paul Ivy?
I just did. I just did. I pointed out the crisis families.
The
The
crisis family. Yeah,
children,
you mentioned the crisis family. You
yes.
mentioned the crisis family. Okay. So you're
But it's
saying to
true.
me, during
Yes.
that time, we are deteriorating in that farm since 19, let's say 1980 until now. Families.
It has gotten worse. It has gotten worse in terms of how children are reared, how children are raised. You don't have, the typical a nuclear family, and they don't have to be married necessarily, but we're talking about two parents in a household, children being socialized in the normal ways of, please, thank you, excuse me, those kind of things and so forth. We are not formatting our children in any systematic way.
Okay, so you're saying then, and I hear you earlier allude to the fact that we have cultural issues that would have contributed immensely to the crime. How do we move forward in fixing that?
Well, can I say something to kind of support Dr. Ivy's point?
Okay.
Because even though my forte is law enforcement, I don't want to be tunnel vision. That's what I'm looking at. Yes. But he's correct that, you talk about the cocktail, everything is sort of interconnected, right? Yes. And to move Jamaica forward, all hands got to be on deck, right? And we can't be attached to a particular point or ideology, right? Or, philosophy of how to do things. Then it becomes self-defeating. And sometimes we get ego into the way. And we don't realize that we are kind of speaking past each other when we're actually saying the same thing, just trying to weave the solution together. All these variables are important. And even though I am very big on the law enforcement, I don't want to just put emphasis on that and ignore what anyone else is saying, contributing to the solution. It's incumbent on us to listen carefully. That's why I said earlier, I am here to learn, even though I'm focusing on the crime. So go ahead, Dr. Ivy.
Yes, I'm also wanted to make the point, Mr. Sutherland, and you are extremely correct, Mr. Brown, in appreciating that the multifaceted, multi-pronged approach is what we're seeking to have. And there's a logical basis for it, A country is organized and run through effective institutions, a multiplicity of different institutions. I've always used two analogies in my life. One is the human body, consists of a number of different organs and organ systems that work together to make the human functions. Right. Then there is the internal combustion engine that runs motor vehicles. That's the cooling system, the power system, the hydraulic system, the braking system. Countries are similarly configured conceptually. So what we want is to make the institutions in Jamaica work. A dimension of law enforcement is the courts, for example. How effective have the courts been when you look at that backlog of cases that have been there over the years? You hear that court reporters are on strike because they are underpaid and there isn't sufficient number of court reporters. You hear of jurors being paid $2,000 per day as stipend to come and sit for 2 weeks, leave their work and come and sit on a case for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever and the case might be.
It's $17 here though.
Oh. Yes, but the larger point is this, and this is where we come back to governance, and effective governance, because it is to make all of these institutions work. Social programs, a Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Countries need safety nets so that people do not fall below the poverty line and so forth. I hear the point being made many times in Jamaica about lack of resources. I do not buy that. Governments are never without money. It is a question of what they choose to spend it on. Governments always have money. You look when elections are called, our money just starts flow all over the place. They might open a road, they might build this, they might do this, they might do that, and whatever. I don't buy that argument. Jamaica is not a poor country. Jamaica is a poorly governed country.
Wow.
Well, you're speaking quite lucidly, and you're speaking to the heart of the issues. And for the listeners who are hearing this conversation, this is not a partisan conversation. So I don't think that when Dr. Ivy says that, irrespective of what his political procedure might be, he's not speaking against the current government in a political sense, right? Because for years, for decades, we have been going through these problems, right? So
Yes.
these arguments can be applied to both sides of the aisle, right? It is true, right? So governance is responsible. Yeah, no, like you were reading my mind when you spoke about that the government has money, because I was thinking about, the jargon of scarce goods, right? Competing for scarce goods. But it's a matter of allocation. And that's the
That's
point
what
you're
it is.
making. How you allocate the resources you have for the maximum effect within the context of your country's development.
That's
That's the
it.
point you're
There
making.
you go. There you go. There
That's
you
it.
go. There you go. There you go.
So when we sum it up, you see, we have to look at broad strokes. Governments, as I said earlier, governments have the levers to make changes at a country level changes. An individual can't make changes at country level. It has to be government, because they have laws, they have policies at their disposal. They have the resources, the power of the state to orchestrate the change. And
Right.
so if we were to say, and I'm going to say it and I'm going to repeat it ad nauseum, it is really a function of governance. And that's one side of the equation. And the other side of the equation is that citizens have abdicated their responsibilities as part of the democratic requirements and as part of a democratic process. Citizens must be engaged. You must hold people accountable. You must make demands on our elected representatives. When we have things happening our politicians across the political divide over the years, let me be clear, over the years, they can rely on 9-day wonder in Jamaica. They can rely on something, it in the news media, and it dies down, and we go back to business as usual. In the US, I've always admired situations where constituents hold their senators almost hostage in their offices, demanding of them effective representation. I've seen that happen, and I would like to see that in Jamaica, where we demand effective representations. I said yesterday in a social media post that our politicians still believe that the old playbook of coming around now that the local government election is in the air, dropping marl to Marla Road, in and giving out fertilizers and giving out all type of other goodies. They are still in that playbook. And this is 2024, and that is the playbook that they are still using.
So let me ask this question. Sorry to interrupt you. What's the role of the educators in Jamaica, even currently? I mean, I've been away from Jamaica for a while, as far as the dissemination of the civic process, because politicians are politicians, wherever in the world you find them, right? They're
Yes.
humans, right? I think it is James Madison who said something to the effect, one of America's founding father, that, if men are angels, there will be a need for government, right? So even those who are governing, they're imperfect, right? So if the people are not sufficiently knowledgeable regarding the civic process, politicians will continue to do that year after year, regardless of party, because that's how they make it's in their interest to keep the people at that level, because that's how they maintain power. So, what's the role of educators who is trying to be that bridge to transform the level of thinking and awareness in Jamaica?
Well, speaking for myself, I could just keep quiet in my relative comfort as an academic, and say, well, then, I mean, I'm comfortable. I can pay my bills. I don't have to be on a platform like this speaking so passionately. I could choose to do that. But I've chosen to do otherwise because I see where there's the need to have a voice. And part of my having this voice is basically to encourage other people to speak out. I was positively motivated by Martin Henry. You can Google him, public affairs commentator Martin Henry, to say, well, then, get into the public square and make my voice heard. We also need this matter of civic education. Civic education is something that we really need to get back to. And that is one of the reasons why I admire Marcus Garvey. When Marcus Garvey came on the scene in post Emancipation Jamaica and saw the condition of his people, he was stirred into action. But not only was he stirred into action, he realized that he had to start, his starting point had to be consciousness raising. He had to get into the minds of the people. We need a revolution of the minds of our fellow Jamaicans. I've made this point and I'm taking the opportunity to articulate it. That you see, why is it that we're, in America they call it black on black crime. In Jamaica, essentially, that's what we have because it is black people largely killing black people. Why is that so? I have formulated a view that if we knew more about our history, if we taught more history in our schools, our people would have more communal solidarity. Communal solidarity, and we would see that if we are going to attack a man, we are attacking our own brother. And so we're missing that communal solidarity, which is a function of the deficiency of historical knowledge. The other point I've made is this, and I've said it in different fora. We who are capacitated, have the capacity to do certain things, and any other person, we must act within our spheres of competence. Let me use a simpler word. We must act in our domains of competence and influence to try to effect change. Do what we can where we are, where we have influence and where we are competent. Let's do that. As an educator, for example, I've taken to writing books. And I was telling Mr. Sutherland that I have 17 books that I've written. I have 5 books that I'm writing now, one of which is a portrait of the Jamaica Constabulary Force.
Really?
Another one is a portrait of the education system. Another one is a portrait of the justice system. Another one is a portrait of the municipal corporations. I've written 3 volumes of a book called Jamaica, Paradise and Paradox, where I have said that Jamaica is essentially bipolar. We have some of the best, and we have some of the worst of the worst. We are kind of like a bipolar society. And what I've sought to do in terms of bringing matters to the fore is to pull information from multiple sources. Persons who have studied the issue. Take crime, for example. It is not a lack of information about crime fighting from research in Jamaica. We're not lacking in that. We had the National Committee on Crime that was chaired by Justice James Carr. In 2009, Professor Anthony Harriot gave the Grace Kennedy lecture, and it was about crime. I have here in my hand an edited book by Professor Anthony Harriot. See there? Understanding Crime in Jamaica. We have the information that has been garnered from research and from experts in the field. What we need to do is to have the will and the effective institutions to orchestrate a better Jamaica for all Jamaicans. You have mentioned, Mr. Brown, Governor General Patrick Allen has said, there is nothing wrong with Jamaica that cannot be fixed by what is right about Jamaica. Every Jamaican needs to stand up and speak for what is right. And every Jamaican needs to do the best in their area of competence and influence in where they are working and where they are situated. We need active citizenship. Those who can teach another person. Those who can influence a youth positively, influence a youth positively, which I've done in terms of just mentorship and all of those type of things. It is possible for us to turn around this country. It has been said, people power. I wanted to make this point about people power in terms of holding elected officials accountable. It has been said that the power of the people is greater than that of the people in power. If there is anything to be feared, it is government must fear the people.
Yeah, well, it's the concept we have here in America. It's government of the people by the people, so to speak, the Abraham Lincoln Mansion. So you mentioned something about the current minister, Dr. Chan, coming
Yes.
more to the
Social
appreciation, right?
intervention. Yes.
In terms of social intervention, right? And it's my understanding that there might be a new ministry along that line, right? What I'm trying to put out there to you, based upon everything you're saying, it's not a lack of information or academics, right? Is
Yes.
it possible that with this new ministry, all of this can be somehow synthesized and coalesced and in a surgical way be applied to the problems we have now? Not just, I mean, I don't want to sound political,
The
but there are
Ministry
some
of
countries,
Peace. The Ministry of Peace.
yes, something like Ministry of Peace and Human Development. The concept, I think the concept is good. I mean, and I don't want to speak too much as I get in the crosshairs of Jamaican politics, right?
Yeah.
But from what you're saying, I'm tapping into what you're saying because that's the only way we can go forward now. It has to be a holistic approach, right? So I think like a crime fighter, but I'm sufficiently open-minded and knowledgeable to understand that that is the core. That's the, I think Dr. Gill mentioned something like, regardless of what the law enforcement does, JDF and JCF, people like those socialists, sociologists, right? They're the ones with the soft power. They're the ones who are going to make the real difference in the communities on the ground. And that's true. That's all when the US goes into an era, not to say, I don't want to digress, but the concept is that you use the stick, the carrot and stick, right? You know, you go to your overwhelming poor, but you get into a community and the people like special forces, people who are warriors, but they have other skill set to bring to the community.
They call it winning hearts and minds.
That's it. So the
formula
formula is there. Go ahead, sir.
Yes. But we have in Jamaica also what is in what was complementing or going alongside the states of emergencies was what they call the ZOZOs, zones of special operations. And the principle was this: clear, hold, and build. But we have not put some equivalent amount of resources into the ZOZOs as have gone into the state of emergency, the states of public emergency. Clear, hold, and build the communities. People's living environment will affect their outlook and their state of mind and how they perceive themselves, you know. We have communities in which the social services are non-existent. Garbage piles up and rot for weeks. They have no water, no consistent water. People bathe on the communal pipes. Young adolescent girls on a standpipe bathe, all those type of things. These are not factors conducive to an orderly society. We have to reset Jamaica. We have to reset it. Right. We have to reset it. So to the point of joined up government. So what we need is joined up government and also civil society. Every different entity has a role to play. Government has its primary responsibility for law and order. You have the families for the proper socialization of children. You have the uniformed groups, the boys, what is it called? The scouts, Girl Guides, all of those type of things have their roles to play. You have the schools that need to play a particular function. You have civil society. All of those institutions must be directed towards a common goal. That's why Norman Manley said on the 7th of August, 1962, to orchestrate a safe and happy home for all. You know, sometimes when I hear some of the songs that are being played on some of the radio stations that are owned by so-called respectable uptown people. These are the people who own the radio stations, you know, but yet you have some songs denigrating women, advocating violent lyrics, then we bust up a boy's skull and this and that and so on. What kind of society can you have when those things are played on public airwaves?
That's my belief. I have a problem with that too, but I've been challenged in many ways, saying that the songs that that are sung now is actually what they're seeing, and nothing is wrong with.
Yes, I'm talking that they're just reflecting their reality. Nonsense.
Well, the thing is,
down to public.
that in itself can be partially true, right? But an explanation of a phenomenon doesn't present a justification. See what I'm
Right.
saying? So back to what Dr. Ivor was saying, right? He has his fingertips on the myriad of potential solutions if they're implemented. So I hope the policymakers listen to you. I hope that, somehow you will move the levers of power, because things like these, what I'm hearing from you, that's what Jamaica need to respond to. Now, back to my lane, my forte, right? As it relates to crime fighting. Sometimes it's hard to make causal relations, right?
Yes.
Now, everything you're saying is right. And you made a point about citizens. You talk about the duty of citizens, right? And to get citizens to obey the law. I've seen that the respect, I'm trying to bring our thesis together, right?
Yes.
As it relates to the Macmillan effect too. I've seen how respect for the JCF has plunged. A policeman trying to arrest someone and no respect. They're attacking policeman in uniform, right? No, I know that police over the years contribute to that because of the gap, the public trust, and how police officers treated citizens, right? However, when you have a country that the people don't respect the law, it doesn't matter how you're not gonna get the space to even implement those other policies that you need. You see what I'm saying? So I'm gonna ask you, or ask both you, Mr. Solan, as it relates to why Jamaican citizens don't really respect policemen. Whether they don't have the status because they're not getting paid at a certain level, and people more value materialism more than integrity and so on. And sometimes that force police officers to go the corrupt way because corruption is a cancer in our society. So we learn it, right? They take bribe, they're going to drugs and all that, right? But what happened? I'm coming back to this, and don't think I'm trying to be political because we all know who was the prime minister between 1981 and 1989. But I'm trying to find out from a policing standpoint, what do you think with all these social factors that you're referring to, which are important, what role did they play, or what was the architecture of the Jamaican society during those 9 years? Why the annual number of murders didn't exceed 500? What do you think, Mr. Sutherland? And both of
I
you.
honestly think that the police was more respected then, and people and Dr. Paul, if we talk against the fear, but I think the fear of the police have its effect then. That's
Yes.
that's where I am looking, because I've seen the change. I remember in 1993 when police started to get arrested for for their doings. I mean, I'm not condoling it at all, but after police we start have a commissioner that started to police the police aggressively. I see where things started to change as it relates to the respect for the
Yes,
police
because you
in
see, they wanted
1993.
to have their own way. They see, they wanted to have their own way, just like in 1865 when they were formed to bash out the brains of black people. And we cannot have a situation like that. You see, we talk about you, Mr. Brown, you talk about respect. People don't respect the police. You have not mentioned the police respecting the
No,
citizen.
I said that also. I need to
Because,
add that.
like I said, what we need to understand, rights-based citizenship is fundamental in a society. A citizen has rights. You can't just see a man and talk about, hey boy, come here, give me a
No.
search. Justice Batts in a ruling mentioned that arbitrary stop and search is illegal and unconstitutional. And the police them say, go ahead with that. Go ahead with that. You can't say anything you want. Say we go and stop and search just the same. There was a case of a fellow named Gary Emans. It was in that ruling that Justice Batts ruled, where he was carrying some people to a beach and they stopped him, and they did all kind of things happened out of it. And in the ruling, Justice Batts recounted the history of how we came to have rights as a people. It is a mutuality. It goes two ways. Law enforcement has to respect the citizen. You
You're
can't
perfectly
just
correct. And that's the
some,
point
some,
I
guy-
have been making.
some
That's
guys
where,
work at my house, and one of them said to me that they had a situation with a young miss, and the young miss went to the station and just made a report. And the police simply came and said, come down to the station and lock them up. no investigation. You don't say to the person, okay, we have a report about so and so. We are notifying you. We're going to investigate to see if there's any credence to it. What Jamaican police do, generally speaking, lock up somebody, then go investigate. I mean, the modernization of the society has to be predicated on respect for the rights of the citizen. If a citizen breaks the law, they have to be prosecuted.
Okay. Dr. Ivy,
But it's two ways.
every articulation, okay, also has a counter articulation. And it's
Yes.
not about being right or wrong, either or. But out of that discourse, then we can find the median as to say, okay, what is the appropriate solution? And I don't want the listeners to get a one-sided perspective of the JCF at large, because I am a product of the JCF and I'm proud to have served in the JCF. And everything you're talking about, I concur, because I identify these things as a young police. I understand the construct of our society, policemen being products from the society. So I'm just saying, if the government, can I finish with this? If the government did not invest enough in terms of training, educating, developing the force, you're not going to have the results that you think you need, right? Now, as it relates to the Macmillan effect, what I'm trying to say to you, Macmillan was justly appointed because they had to address all these things. What police officers have been critiquing was his leadership style. There's a way to do something. Macmillan didn't come from the poor socioeconomic class. So he didn't understand how to lead his men. You have to lead your men. You could get a ragtag bunch of people who don't know anything and you can turn them around to be the best. Macmillan wasn't that guy. So we can keep blaming the force and don't understand that the police force was also given, like basket to carry water.
Are we going to say that everything to do with the less than desirable attributes that we're looking for in the force can be laid at Macmillan's feet?
Pardon me?
Are we going to lay all the blame at
No, but you're not following what
feet?
I'm trying to say. I'm a policeman. I'm speaking as a policeman. I respect you as an academic. Listen to me as a policeman. I might not be in Jamaica, but I'm a policeman first and foremost. Equity, my drill instructor. When I was at police academy, you know what the man said to me? Once a police, always a police. And I took that as an indoctrination. That's nonsense. But I've done other things. And there's nothing to me like being a policeman. I'm a lawyer. And there's nothing to me like being a policeman in Jamaica. That's where I got all the savviness from the academy and from serving the Jamaican people as a police officer. I know there's a tendency, and that's the Macmillan effect. What happened? People look at policemen in one lens because of the bad behavior and the bad eggs and the corrupt. But there are wonderful policemen and women with whom I serve that are also victims of this analysis, because the buck goes right back to our Truman, the governance, both JLP and PNP governance. They fail the JCF. And I will become passionate now because I will defend the JCF. And I don't want anyone to be putting down the JCF and saying this, that. Yes, there are problems, but the government did not put the resource in to train, to get rid of all these guys, but still do it with the proper glove, with the proper psychology. Macmillan psychology was not right for the JCF. Let me tell you this. In 1993, when these numbers started to go up, because I was serving at anti-crime when Macmillan was the commissioner. And that's why I tell you, he didn't inspire policemen. It was because that seasoned policemen like Mr. Hewitt and Mr. Deal and all that, who notified crime. So we fought crime anyway, right? So the government can't take any credit. Not a JLP or PNP government can take credit for dealing with crime. They have failed. Mr. Siaga, in 1980s, I'm trying to find out what was going on, why there's only 400 murders a year. We need to address that, because some of these things you're talking about existed in Jamaica at the time. What was the role of the JCF that time? If at the end of this year we get only 400 murders, a lot of people say, oh, I'm sure Mr. Andy would say, yes, we have done well. Mr. Holmes would say, we have done well. And Mr. Golding can't say no. But what was it that was happening? Policing is essential to get what you are talking about. Without the space, to carry out all these things. If citizens don't respect the police, you cannot achieve that. And they don't respect the police because Macmillan came into office and over police. I'm not talking about Indicom. I've heard from a lot of people say Indicom was justified. Indicom was a just mechanism to control extrajudicial killing. You understand me? Because sometimes police even afraid to even report things because police are, the hierarchy wasn't proper. So I'm not just criticizing. I'm just trying to say when we come with solutions, we got to be even-handed. The JCF, right, with all its flaws, right, is a good institution, but it was not treated properly. Lack of governance by both GLP and PNP. So someone explain to me why for 9 years there were only 400 murders. And then we're coming to 1,500, 1,600. It's the same little Jamaica. Tell me what was going on. Tell me, Mr. Sutherland, please.
Well, I'm waiting for Dr. Ivory to tell me what are the other layers that would have changed beside the respect for the police around 1993. What happened in addition to that changed the respect for the police?
I am a little bit concerned, if that's the right word, about this notion of respect for the police. Police have statutory functions. Policing is based on law. Policing is not based on the whim of a police officer in a particular situation. It's about the law. And the police are subject to the law just as citizens. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, then that the citizens must respect the police. Of course, they should respect the police. But in the same breath, we have to say the citizens have to respect the rights of the police have to respect the rights of
the police have to respect the rights.
We agree on that, you know.
The Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. It took about 20 years before it was eventually passed in 2011. In a democracy, the Constitution is the supreme law. And I would argue that part of the challenge that we have had in Jamaica, any poll that you do, look at the level of mistrust that is reported in the JCF, for example. And what I also find is that, and I noticed respectfully, Mr. Brown, that you got passionate about
Very
this
passionate
thing,
about the JCF.
that there is, as if police is above criticism.
No, you're not with me, you know. Apparently, you don't listen to me as keen as I listen to you. I am telling you, right?
Yes.
That everything you're saying is right. And I can be the biggest critic of the JCF because I understand the JCF. But I'm trying to explain to you that there's a balance. There must be a balance in the analysis. And where you and I will agree on that, it's a failure of the government, whichever government was in power.
My father used to say,
an organ of the state.
My father used to say that a policeman has never told him to walk fast yet or moving foot from here so to there so and so on. The law-abiding citizen. I am a law-abiding citizen. None of my siblings, cousins, near relatives, and so on have any encounter with law enforcement because we just know that if you're a citizen, you do what is right.
I wish our citizens were like you. Then who would have
you obey the law. You don't rob, you don't thief, you don't murder, you don't
model citizen.
Rape, you know. As citizens have responsibilities in a society. But we cannot have lawlessness from those who are to enforce the law.
No, but let's not dwell on that. The question we are trying to deal with, why for 9 years you had 400 murders, 400 and some murders in Jamaica, right? And now we are seeing these astronomical numbers. Can you opine on that? What do you think was happening that was different then than what's happening now?
No, I have argued that what we have had is a breakdown of the societal fabric. We have seen a breakdown of the societal fabric. We have seen a proliferation at a particular point in time of children having children. The sociologists have found, Professor Sams Vaughan, Dr. Gill, Herbert Gill, Orville Taylor, other sociologists, and so on. they have identified the various factors within the society that have caused a deterioration of the social fabric. It is a social fabric. And what we have also seen is the two Jamaicas coming into fore. A set of Jamaicans who are living in paradise and a set of Jamaicans who are living in hell. It has been said that if a child doesn't feel the warmth of a village, they will burn it down to feel the warmth. And we have marginalized a set of persons. We have put them on gully banks to live. We have put them in garrison communities to live, and that's been the means of their survival. And we have seen a general degradation. Remember, former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson talked about needing for a restoration of values and attitudes. So there's a deterioration of the moral fabric.
You know what I'm
of
missing though, Dr. Ivy?
Yeah?
What I'm really trying to find out from both you and Mr. Sutherland.
Yes.
If Jamaica was a paradise between 1981 and 1989, and all these things you're talking about didn't exist, right? And what caused it, right? With all the analysis you're giving that you say Dr. Gale and others are giving, what really caused Jamaica to move from that paradigm then in the 80s, where you only had 400 people being killed for 9 years, to where we are now? Are you saying the variable that I'm presenting to you from an inside perspective as a former JCF person, which is not my view alone, right, must not be considered as an important variable because it might not fit your perspective of what how the society is supposed to operate? I'm not disagreeing with you, you know. I can say in many ways the JCF was rotten. I think even one time I hear Mr. Adams say something like, oh, like burn it down or destroy it and come again. I mean, we know our problems. We are not saying that the GSF had angels. I am saying to you, it was the leadership style in how the GSF was being fixed at that time. Because you said earlier, you know, that policing is psychology. You understand what I'm saying? When you damage the psychology of law enforcement officers to really carry out their duties in a particular, regardless of the problems you're trying to solve, you have to reform people. You have to know how to change the system, not demotivate people.
But it's kind of interesting because my interaction with many police in recent times, they are better trained, they are more educated.
You still have the same murders, and that's the point I make. You see, I'm not in debating. My passion here, right, is to see or hear on the news that you don't have so many murders every year in Jamaica. If I hear that, okay, it's only 400 murders we have, something is going on. Good. So that's what I'm asking. What was happening then? That's not happening now.
Are you saying, for example, during that particular period, our courts were efficient?
That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm saying.
And that is why I'm saying that I cannot identify any one factor, because we had terrible court situations. We had leaky prisons every 2 weeks a year that somebody.
You mean in the 80s you're talking, right?
Contraband. Yes.
Right.
For the entire period of my adult life.
No, but still try to explain to me. In other words, you know, I see the numbers, aberrations here. But for 9 years straight, you have it under 500. So I'm trying to say, what was going on that caused that?
And your thesis is?
I have no thesis. I'm asking a question. My thesis is about the Macmillan effect. But for that time period, from 1981, after you have that spike in 1980, 800, then suddenly it dropped to 400. And for 9 years, it was just 400. I am just asking you, what do you think contributed to that?
Historically, 1980 is singled out as a watershed moment, a watershed period in Jamaica's history, having regard to the political campaign and the civil war that was actually there. You know, that's something that has stuck out in terms of that particular period. And so the immediately afterwards, that may have shocked the country to say that, look, we really can't go back there, because that was strictly in relation to politically motivated violence. So it tapered off. And just like after the 2020 incursion in Tivoli Gardens, and all the criminals were running scared, and then the state did not continue to act effectively in terms consistently acting
Consistently. Yeah.
consistently is what is missing. And so when you have the other things that are at play and you have a state that is not carrying out its function, that's why you have the thing that has run away and has gone over 1,000 and it has become normalized. And then when you put the history, when you overlay history on top of all of this, you get to see, you remember that Port Royal was called the wickedest city on earth. I have often said that Jamaican soil is probably soaked with blood, in terms of what has gone on before and so forth. We can't, duppies sometimes come back to life, So we
Okay.
really can't just say that, the society is a pristine one and it doesn't have any historical overhang, and duppies aren't running up and down the place based on what the history has always
Hold on. To the
been.
point you just made, because you have educated me on the question I was asking, right? So you're saying that because of the terrible violence in 1980, right, it shocked the country to say we went too far, and then for the next 9 years, that accounted for the significant reduction and the maintenance of those numbers of annual murders. That's what I understand to be saying. So I understand it now.
That's a perspective. That's a perspective that can
That's a
be put
perspective.
out there. It's not necessarily the perspective, but that's an explanation that can be proffered. That. But my own beef or my own thesis is revolving around governance and the lack thereof of effective governance and the deterioration of the social fabric of the society. The social fabric is gone. I often say to people, and you really can't use yourself as an example to generalize. When I was growing up, my brothers and sisters and myself, we were one door away from our parents. They were in the house. The home is the first school. And if you look at the human body, where, the cell is the smallest unit, the family is the smallest structural unit of a society. And our family structure has deteriorated in Jamaica in a big way by a number of different things. Persons have had we have for it what is called barrel children. Barrel children are those whose parents have gone abroad to make a better living because the Jamaican economy is so bad, they have to leave the children with an auntie, a bigger sister, or this or that, and so forth. Children who do not have structure are going to be susceptible to antisocial behavior. And we have that multiplied up a lot in the society.
So you're saying is a breakdown in family that brought us to this point? That is,
Dr. Gale is more competent than me in his field. He's an anthropologist, and he has argued that ground zero of Jamaica's crime tsunami is crisis families. That's what Dr. Gale has said as an anthropologist. I'm not an anthropologist.
But that's one perception, one perspective from Dr. Gale. What I must ask you is this, Dr. Ivy, right? Are you telling me, right, that the mutuality of what you're presenting is such that I do agree with you, and I said it from in my opening statement to say there was a need for Colonel Macmillan. So there are issues with the police force, right? So there's a need for police to respect the people and protect their rights. That's a given. We're way past that. But what I want to ask you,
serve, protect, and reassure.
All of that. But what I want to ask you,
well, essentially that's at the core. Serve, protect, reassure.
Right. But what I also want to ask you, within that construct, or within your analysis, because you said policemen, as a statutory function and so on and so forth, are you saying that the people of Jamaica don't also have a civic duty to respect police?
Of course they do.
But
yes, that's why I said it was twofold. Sorry?
No, that sounded somewhat off from what you said earlier, because what I was trying to explain.
I said it about 3 times. I've said that we cannot emphasize just people to respect police.
But that's not the emphasis.
No, let me finish the thought. I've said about 3 times now that we can't just say the people must respect the police without also saying in the same breath the police must respect the
But that has been said. You see, I know you don't grasp what I'm saying, and people out there, we are segmented people. One thing Dr. Gale said in a video I saw, he said when crime going on like this, I'm a one-track mind person with this. I don't want to hear all these
Yes, you
number
said
of murders.
Macmillan is the thing.
I don't want to hear all these numbers of murders every year. And when someone say, okay, it's 1300, last year it was 1390, so we do good. That doesn't make sense, right?
Mr. Brown, let me tell you something. In terms of total agreement with you in terms of law enforcement and the perspective on law enforcement. The police cannot, and I think it was the same Adams who said it, that the JCF has been given a rotten society to police.
Well,
so you see the point I'm making, that it is not to say blame the JCF. That's why I go to the deterioration in the social fabric. I agree with Adams that the police has been given a basket to carry water because they have a rotten society to police. When the municipality, just recently I heard that they have some things called municipal police. When the municipal police allow vendors to take over an entire town, how is the JCF to come now to create order and regulate traffic in
that is true. That is true.
Are everywhere. So you see the point I'm making. So we remember now, we cannot have a police in the back pocket of every citizen. So this society has to have a degree of self-regulation, separate and apart from law enforcement, because enforcement cannot police 3 million people.
You're perfectly right. But Mr. Solon, don't you were saying something to me at one point, right? That when you remove the sort of restraint then, right, within the public psyche, right, in Jamaica, so to speak, right, where they don't have that respect for law enforcement, when police, the JSF, has been made out to be such a rotten institution, and all that, then you have a cascading effect of lack of respect by the public.
Is it made out to be? Is it made out to be? When you say made out to be, it sounds like it is a fabrication.
No.
I don't think it was intentional. I don't think it was intentional at all, but that's what the end result becomes. I think like when I check back the time that that attorney Brown referring to, I can see the decline and the changes, and followed by with that mentality has been fostered, and followed by and then followed by Indicom, and then the police are not protected by the state either. I think the police get a raw deal in all this, and I'm not saying it's in entirety. No, I honestly.
No, you make it sound like what we really need is a police state.
No, you see,
no.
Dr. Ivy, if you really understood, because let me explain this. You're looking at it from the perspective of someone who have never really been in the JCF. I can look at it from both sides, and especially being in a developed country, and especially being an American attorney, where the rule of law and the protection of people's rights, especially a policeman can't just search you like that. I appreciate all that. So I am not at odds with what you're saying.
Okay.
I was giving you a perspective, right? In other words, I'm coming right back to where you want to be, what you're saying.
But interestingly,
we have 7 minutes. We have 7 minutes to wrap up.
Interestingly, based on some high-profile successes that the JCF has been having in recent times, persons are saying, yes, man, it's this kind of force we want.
What kind of success?
A force that effectively investigates, get the evidence, and bring whomever it is before the courts. That's perfect.
And I mentioned that the JCF is a force for good. I am not critiquing the development of the force now.
But when we hear say a police sergeant has been arrested for jacking a truck with full of coconut oil, that is a big black eye for the police force.
Okay, when Mr. Adams said that if he were the commissioner, right, in 6 months, you remember he said something like that? He would clean up the things, right? What I'm really asking, or focusing on
Let
is the
me just say
number
this.
of murders every year.
Before you finish, I just want to tell you guys, for the listeners too, that I think uh Mr. Adams will be on the show next week, according to my schedule. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah,
So,
let's see what he has to say.
I don't know if Dr. Ivy wanna be here when
No,
he's here, but
Dr. Ivy, are you available? I love to
Oh
watch
yes.
that one.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh
yeah,
yes.
I'll watch that one.
he told me that he will be here next week, given he resolved his throat issue. I have a little issue with his throat right now, but we're supposed to have again what's his name? I've just Renita Adams on the program next week Wednesday. And, so, yeah,
I'm looking forward to that because I myself learn from these things. I learn a lot from these exchanges.
Right. I learned myself too, but yeah, we in the last 5 minutes. I can't believe that 2 hours. I'm not feeling so well, and I thought I wasn't gonna pass half an hour, but here I am, almost 2 hours past, and we are here. So, with that being said, I think Dr. Ivy and Attorney Brown need to meet again on this platform because I don't think we have enough time because there are so many layers of things that Dr. Ivy I know have to touch, and from all indication I think Attorney Brown have things that he wants to touch, but we only have our last 5 minutes because we don't want to go over the 2 hour mark.
Yes.
Right. Actually, we have 4 minutes to go. Now, in closing, I'm going to give the opportunity, I'm going to give the floor to Attorney Brown.
Okay. All right. Yeah. You know what? The best one for last. So leave that Dr. Ivy, right? I must say, right? If I didn't come to the podcast here with just a JCF policing mind, right? Our conversation will be so dynamic, much more dynamic, right? But that's why I read what I read first. I wanted to discipline myself and keep it just in line with the JCF and play that advocacy on behalf of the JCF, right? Really believing that the point I was making about Mr. Macmillan, might have some resonance. Who knows? Mr. Adams might shed some light on that. He's more capable than I am to say that or to give a view because he has been serving for so long. But I want to say this, part of why I press certain things is not just for the sake of Dr. Ivy, because I didn't plan to speak much. I came to hear and learn, especially about Jamaica, right? But I pressed you for the sake of the listeners, because in that back and forth, they will develop their understanding and refine their views either way, whether they disagree with me or agree with you. So at the end of the day, I really believe in Jamaica. Let me say this. You see, once I went to Israel, the first time I went to Israel, and I was shocked when people asking me where I'm from. I don't tell them I'm from America. I say I'm Jamaican because I'm proud to be Jamaican. And I'd be surprised how many people overseas, and most Jamaicans know that, or they know about Jamaica, love Jamaica. But what shocked me is that they said, if those leaders in that country could ever fix the problem of crime, that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I know if Jamaica bring down these things, State Department don't have a time to waste to write advice like that, even though tourists are not really being killed or such, right? But it's just those are my closing remarks. Thank you, Dr. Ivy. It was a pleasure.
Yes, it is a pleasure to have interacted with you, Mr. Brown, and I will end where I started. I am one of those Jamaicans who have chosen to live in Jamaica. And I was born post-independence, and I have a passion to see a better Jamaica than what I have lived all my adult life in Jamaica, whereas better must come, and we're not seeing that. And I will end on this particular note. The control of the crime situation in Jamaica is not the responsibility of the JCF. It is the responsibility of the government. True. That is where I will end.
True.
All right. With that being said, as I always said, we are all Jamaicans that we are very much passionate about our country. It's just that we have different perspective as to how to resolve the issue. With that being said, sir, thank you, Attorney Brown, to take time out from your busy schedule to come on my little podcast. No, I don't know where to start with a man like this man, but Dr. Ivy, yeah, I know you have a lot more to say, and I know this is not the end of you on this podcast, but it is indeed a pleasure having you, sir. I feel
Thank you for
honored.
the opportunity. I'm just a regular academic educator.
Well,
Thank you for
A
the
very
opportunity.
humble one.
A very, very humble. And you know, the next time I plan, when you're here, I'm gonna put up a rival against you. If it's not next week when Renita Adams here, I'm gonna put you against a guy they call Ronnie Sutherland. I don't know if you can handle that guy if you ever see him. Dr. Ivy, I'm gonna put you against Ronnie Sutherland. I know you would welcome that one.
I don't have any problems at all because it is really ideas contending. It's ideas
Yes.
contending.
Yes, and I must say I learned a lot from you guys. Each of you that come on this platform, you know, this was birthed from my passion as it relates to the crime situation in Jamaica. And I don't know it all, but each of you come and put your 2 cents. I learn from it. So I'm always ending this program being more knowledgeable and a better person. Thank you guys for being here. Have a good night.
Thank you again, and all the best. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Good evening.